Our viewers, welcome to this special edition of the Bakwetu TV. Today, we've got a very interesting topic. We're going to continue on our topic on agriculture in Zambia. And the theme of our program is rebranding agriculture in Zambia and Africa at large. My our guest is still Dr. Christian Chileshe, and my co-guest is Mr. Nason Bimbe. I'll introduce them before we start the program. In the meantime, let me just encourage you to share this program. It's a very important program. Agriculture is a very important program for Zambia and everybody. Yeah, just a bit of a synopsis. The history of agriculture in Zambia, including factors in social culture and political economy spaces, have shaped what we see of agriculture today in Zambia and much of Africa. There's no question that Africa is far from optimizing on the potential that sits within agriculture. But what will it take to shift towards turning Africa into the food basket that many think it can be? Today's guest argues that it's more than a matter of addressing the hardware aspects, such as agronomic and livestock management practices, or issues such as mechanization or access to finance. There are deep seated mindset issues embedded in our social cultural background that must be addressed. Unless this is done, many more decades will go by with Zambia and other African countries continue to speak about what is not materializing on the ground. Change must happen in the way society thinks and engages with agriculture. There is a need for rebranding, and that's our guest's main message today, that there is a need for rebranding. Dr. Christian Chileshe is a development practitioner with particular focus on entrepreneurship and agribusiness. He has spent much of his 30 years career promoting inclusive and sustainable market system that works for Africa. Agriculture continues to lend itself to including the poor and to lifting many out of poverty. In this third in a series of discussion, Christian continues to provide clear action points for the transformation of Zambia's agriculture and indeed for the rest of Africa. Uh, Dr. Chileshe, welcome to Bakwetu TV.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you also to the viewers that are watching or those that are listening. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bimbe, I wanted to call you Dr. Bimbe. Mr. Bimbe, I don't know why. Maybe you need to do a PhD.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Or maybe we need to drop the titles and just call Christian, Nason,
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
just leave it there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, Mr. Bimbe, uh, please introduce yourself and also ask the first question to our guest.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much, Christian, for joining us. And it'll be nice for people to share. I think I'm not going to introduce myself very much, but I would urge everyone to share because this is a loaded program and it's to be interesting to listen to the discourse that is happening now. Over to you, Patrick. Before I ask the question, probably you can.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Bimbe. We're also joined by Mr. Henry Yamba Kamara. Mr. Kamara, can you please introduce yourself?
Good evening. I am actually calling from Freetown, Sierra Leone. My name is Henry Kamara, and I am currently the grant management specialist for an agribusiness projects funded by the World Bank. I met Christian while we were managing a component of the project under the KPMG, where I was serving as a team lead. It's interesting when he shared the program yesterday, and I was intrigued that I should participate in such a program because we both have a common agenda to support agricultural development in Africa. So I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity and the platform to participate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamara. Mr. Kamara, Yamba, are you Zambian or you from Sierra Leone?
Ah, I am a Sierra Leonean. I'm not a Zambian. I'm a Sierra Leonean.
Because
Thank you.
Yamba is a Zambian name,
Oh,
actually
I see.
from the north. I
Oh, I
think
see. I
Namwanga
see.
or somewhere there.
I see.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
see. Not really. I'm not. Thank you.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Kamara, I
Tough.
know Kamara is a very popular name for some footballers. I think there were Kamaras
Oh,
in
yes,
Senegal
yes.
or Senegal or Togo or somewhere there.
Absolutely. Kamara is known for, particularly in Africa, West Africa. Yes, I used to heard of Kamara, who is a footballer.
Yeah,
But sadly, I'm not.
yeah. I follow football very well, but I
Yes.
also follow agriculture very well because it's what makes us alive. Without agriculture,
Okay.
we wouldn't be alive.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So just some housekeeping. Whenever we are not talking, can we please mute ourselves? And I think we all know how to mute ourselves. And then when we called upon or when we are talking, that's when we unmute. Over to you, Mr. Bimbe, for the first question to our guest, Dr.
Oh,
Christian.
thank you very much, Patrick, and welcome, Dr. Kamara. It's good to have you on our program, and
Thank you.
it just makes us happy that this is now becoming a Pan-African program, which is very, very good because we share the same issues, we share the same problem, and we also see that this is the way to go as Africa. Just to begin with, before Patrick, before Christian answers the question, my question basically is exactly what do we have in mind when we refer to rebranding agriculture in Zambia, or probably the continent. But before you delve into that, could you just tell us, where we are coming from in terms of this program and the build up to where we are now? Just the key takeaways from the previous 3 series in the program.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nelson. We've been running through a series discussing how we can turn around agriculture. And we started by first of all, just making a very explicit statement that it is possible to turn around agriculture. And we said that we will need champions from different spheres. Of course, political will was at the top of that list, but then also we need industrial captains, private sector players to play their role. We said that we would need financial institutions, that would need the development sector to also play their role, that it's a partnership that changes agriculture to unlock the potential that we know exists. Then following on from that was where we actually came up with a 4-point plan, where we said, number one, there has to be investment to develop a roadmap. And we did say that roadmap has to be participatory, go beyond agriculture experts, but it has to be very clear. It has to be phased to include the short term, the immediate, but also medium term, which falls within a political cycle, because the decision makers are politicians. And unless we respond to their interests, we would not go far. Okay, they will pay lip service, but they will not risk losing in the next election. So there has to be a medium-term plan that shows a component that begins to show results by the time you're getting to the next election. Then we have to embed in that a more long-term process that may be materialized after 10 years, but which can be picked up by successive governments because it's moving in a direction they also identify with, does not expose them to too much risk in terms of staying in power. So it is that three-pronged or three-phased plan, we called it. Then after that, we said there has to be stakeholder mobilization because we acknowledge that it cannot be done by any particular stakeholder. I mean, governments have tried and we haven't gone far. The donor community has thrown money at agriculture and we haven't gone very far. The private sector will try, but because they represent private sector interests, they'll be careful. Financiers can't throw money, private sector financiers, that's depositors' money, okay? So unless there is a mobilization of the different stakeholders, including the farmer groups, the different farmer groups, and in Africa, mostly it's smallholder farmers, organizing them, and also working with the larger commercial farmers, that is another important component. So we said that has to be done, and in most cases, governments are in a good place to do that. Not always, but in many cases, governments are in a good place. So then moving on from there, we said now number 3 is where we are. We said there has to be a rebranding of the agriculture sector. And that is today's program. And maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Christian. So my first question really is, when we talk about rebranding, what exactly do we mean? How does that look like, or how is it going to look like?
Okay, so I'm using rebranding in the general sense so that and I've been very deliberate in these programs. I try to use terminologies that people can identify with, that just simply makes sense, so that we can apply them now specifically to agriculture. So I'm using rebranding in the general marketing sense. Basically, we want to change perceptions about agriculture. There are many perceptions about agriculture. Many of them are recognized to be rather negative, but there are also some perceptions that are seen to be positive, but they are still not advancing the cause of agriculture development. So we are addressing those that appear negative, but even some of those that appear positive. So we are changing perceptions, the way people think about agriculture, the way we practice agriculture. That is rebranding, so that we have a different way in which we look at it and a different way in which we practice agriculture, so that we can be on the tracks that can lead to major agriculture development.
Thank you very much. So when we do this, who should be involved in this kind of process, and what are we trying to get, or rather the end goal within the process itself? So it's kind of two things in there. So it's who is going to be involved in the process, and how do we know that we are getting it right, really, as that process is going to be happening.
Maybe to first look at the issue of who should be involved. I think I have been very consistent in the last 2 or so programs by insisting that agricultural development is not exclusively for experts in agriculture, whether it is the agronomy, or it is the livestock sciences, or it is agriculture economics, it could be agriculture engineering, or anything of that sort. It's not exclusive to those that have studied or practiced agriculture. Agriculture development affects livelihoods. It goes to the very core of our existence here in Africa, okay? And because of that, agriculture development would need to involve a cross spectrum of players. And even when we narrow it down to experts, my argument is that we actually should have individuals that may even be outside agriculture taking the lead. The fact that there are major social cultural dynamics that affect how we think about agriculture and how we practice agriculture actually means that leading experts may come from the social sciences, because they can look at the history. Where are we coming from? Where are we? There are individuals from the political economy, okay, experts in that space, political science, who says what can we learn from the way politicians have engaged with agriculture. So my argument is that they provide the framework within which the science of agriculture can now be rightly positioned. If we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about changing perceptions. Experts that can drive the process of changing perceptions are not likely to sit in agriculture. They're likely to sit in other spheres of expertise. You are talking about people that understand the anthropology and sociology and all other aspects, psychologists, psychosocial experts, those that can say, if you want to change the way people think, these are the stages of evolution that we must go through. We're talking about people in the marketing space, who I know we made good use of during the HIV/AIDS pandemic in what we're calling social marketing. I know we drew in experts from the marketing space to champion behavioral change in terms of how we dealt with sexual and reproductive health, for instance. So we do even have a reference point where we brought in experts outside the health to come and deal with what was initially perceived to be a health issue, HIV and AIDS. But we did agree at some point that HIV and AIDS is not a health issue. It is actually a social cultural issue. It's a developmental issue. And so to address it requires experts from different spheres of expertise. Similarly, if we're going to address challenges that are in agriculture, because they go to the core of our livelihoods, they are not primarily related to the agriculture sciences. They have to do with the social cultural dynamics and the livelihood issues. And because of that, the framework for development needs to be led by actually experts outside agriculture, and those that may be in fields such as the social sciences as we know them, the different areas, and also areas such as marketing, because we're talking about rebranding, changing the perceptions with regard to how agriculture is perceived.
That's wonderful. I just wanted to take you back to the previous program where we looked at the roadmap. And in that, we also looked at the stakeholders that could be involved in that. Can you just shed more light? Should those involved in the actual road mapping should be the same in the rebranding, or should you co-opt other people?
Actually, the whole process of developing a roadmap has to be inclusive. And this is the message that governments in Zambia, in the entire Africa have to understand. Agriculture development has to be inclusive because it goes to the core of our existence. So in the earlier program, we did say that we must include different expert disciplines, like I've referred to them, but I did also say we need to include different stakeholders. But it is these experts who must now create a framework within which the players can come in, because there are two groupings here. There's the group of experts that define how we're going to move, and there is the group of stakeholders that come and play in that space. So we need to keep those two clear, okay? And of course, when it comes to playing in that space, some of those that may have been part of the developing the roadmap can participate, but there's some intersectional space. But there's a group of experts that develop the roadmap, and then there is a cluster of players that come and play in that space. So aside the experts that I've mentioned, the players will be, number one, current groupings that are playing in that space directly, the farmers, okay? And I emphasize the smallholder farmers because they usually fall off. I've been in this space for at least a couple of decades. I know. I've been involved in developing national agriculture investment plans. I know. And from the recent experience we had, you talked about a group that has been constituted by the president of Zambia to advise him on agriculture. If you look at that group, you've left out the smallholders. The smallholders are in the majority. That's number one. In fact, it's the smallholders that feed Zambia. Let's remember that. They're not economically viable, but the little they produce actually adds up to feed the country. That's number one. Number two, those smallholders constitute the majority of voters. In fact, they're almost exclusively nationals. A number of the large-scale players may even be foreign. They're coming through foreign direct investment. So now, if you are going to pander too much to the large players, it is not in the interest of politicians to neglect the smallholders. They are important from an economic perspective. They are important from a political perspective. They constitute the majority of voters in agriculture. Okay, so the actual producers of agricultural commodities are P1. They are number one. Okay, then from there we can now talk about other industry players such as industrialists, what I call champions of industries that are not sitting in agriculture, but because of their desire to invest and reap, they may be interested in investing in agriculture. Again, we forget them. When we are trying to sell agriculture, we need to look at industrialists that are in different sectors. Remember, they are in those sectors because there is money to be made in those sectors. Their interest is not even the sector. It is the money being generated. So if we went to industrialists that are sitting in mining and demonstrated that there is money to be made in agriculture, they will be very happy to diversify their portfolios and include agriculture. Others are sitting in manufacturing. They'll be very happy to remain in processing, but maybe do agri-processing, become off-takers for the producers because there are conditions to working in industry. So if there is a real opportunity, they can mobilize resources and come in. So the second component are those, because there's a lot of capital that can flow into agriculture if they are aware of the opportunities. Okay. Then, of course, there are the financiers, the conventional providers of capital. There is money that needs to be lent out, but without clarity, without a clear roadmap on agriculture, there is high risk. So depositors' money do not easily flow into agriculture, but financiers are also players that we need to keep in mind. Development partners, NGOs, and the like, they are constantly engaging in agriculture, except there is no framework that they are working in so that they're contributing to a common goal. I have worked in this sector and can tell you that there are instances when different funding agencies or development programs are actually working at cross purposes. Okay? Or they may not even realize that they are hurting the very cause towards which they feel they are contributing. So a framework helps them fit somewhere and move in a certain direction. I mean, countries like Rwanda are already going that way, where they're saying, we, the government, lead the development of the framework. Donors come in to support that framework, and we tell them where they fit. No development partner goes into Rwanda and does what they think they should do. Because the government from 2011 at the Busan conference in South Korea made it very clear that it's government responsibility to bring about development, to lead the development process. We lead the development of the framework, and a funding agency comes and fits within that framework. So again, development partners are important, but they must fit within a framework. And we can go on and mention a few other players that we can draw in, but I think those are some of the major players that must come and fit within this framework. And when we're talking about rebranding agriculture, we're talking about shifting the perceptions from starting with this very constituency of players that I've referred to, shifting the perception of agriculture in the minds and in the practice of this very constituency of players I've just described.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Christian. You've really articulated that, answered that question very well, well articulated. Uh, Mr. Kamara, have you got any question, comment, or contribution so far? What
Yes,
Dr. Christian has talked about? Over to you.
yes, I've been following the conversation, and I'm very pleased with the issues that are coming up. For me, sometimes when you hear people talk about branding, or rebranding, the first thing that comes to mind is that what has happened that requires rebranding, and one will tend to then challenge him or herself by saying that how can we make the sector relevant or more relevant? How can we make the sector attractive? How can we make the sector competitive? And of course, change of perception. And I said this because, I mean, Christian already mentioned the change of perception, which most times I remember there was a time somebody was saying that make agriculture sexy. But beyond that, I believe that there are other perceptions that people may have developed over time. And agriculture has been since creation, I would imagine. But yet still, particularly countries in Africa are still struggling to make agriculture competitive, to make agriculture relevant. It may be relevant, but to what extent have we used its relevance in order to make it competitive? I would want to say here that yes, there are players that we required, and Christian have mentioned those players already. The farmers, or smallholder farmers, they really have a role to play. The industry associations also have a role to play. The government agencies and policymakers have a role to play. The consumers have a role to play. The environmentalists have a role to play. The academics have a role to play. These are important people, sectors, or institutions that can bring about a change. What kind of change are we looking for when we talk about rebranding? Then we talk about modernization. We need to modernize our farming practices because it's only when you modernize you become competitive. You can innovate as a result of the modernization. Even the quality of our product can also make us competitive. We are struggling in Africa sometimes when it comes to access to market. We have all trade agreements that we sign. We have the AGOA, we have the All Bottoms, we have regional trade agreements, but yet we've still not been able to access European market. But let's even don't talk about European market. What about the regional market? What about the African market? Should we not eat products that are healthy? Can we not produce healthy product? Are we just producing product for the sake of production? And agriculture can be tied to health. If you don't provide the right product or the right food for your people, you will find out that you will spend more money in looking after them. So the question that I normally challenge policymakers is not about who is producing, but how can we produce healthy products that can keep us alive? Another area that normally talks about is sustainability. Sustainability is very key, particularly when it comes to agribusiness. Agribusiness in itself is a discipline. It's like doing business in agriculture. You can produce as much product as possible, but if you don't know how to market those products, and if you don't know what the consumer is looking for, then you are not competitive. And you will not be sustainable because you will not be able to promote the business. Another area that I think we also need to talk about is post-harvest losses. These are all areas that can also bring about rebranding, because even as we speak, we still have high incidence of post-harvest losses. Is it about lack of technology? Is it about lack of know-how? Because when you look at waste and waste management or waste losses, you find out that they are of an increase. One, not knowing how to do business and also not being able to manage what you have produced can also lead to you becoming non-competitive and very unsustainable.
Sure.
I think for me, what we need to focus on is how to make agriculture more profitable with very low risk. Let me pause for now.
That was fantastic, Mr. Kamara. Um, I've got a question here. Last week, we had the roundtable discussion, and we were talking about Cyclone Freddy in Malawi. You know how it has devastated the country, and then we also talked about then we asked ourselves a question: how should African country prepare for such disasters? And we also talked about, Mr. Bimbe, if you remember, food security. And you've talked about something very important here, about agriculture has to be sustainable, and obviously you've talked about profitability. And then the other point is also saving the environment. But then I don't know whether it's Mr. Kamara or Dr. Chileshe who should answer this question. We've talked about modernization. Obviously, I believe modernization is part of one of the part of the things that will help us should we have say a drought because of climate change, sustainability. So how should we? Don't you think we one of the ways we should modernize is to encourage farmers to use irrigation? Because should we have a disaster, are we gonna say because there's drought, then we don't have food, and then we're gonna die? Should we start or the question is, what should you tell policymakers about modernization, the importance of modernization, especially irrigation?
Yeah, okay, maybe I can have a go at that. It's an important point that Henry has mentioned. I think the thrust of my argument has been that we have to address mindsets, because we've been around, and I know Dr. Kamara has been in this for a long time, and he's led even agencies that are looking at commodities here in Sierra Leone. I know that, and I know he has seen this. We have tried using different approaches towards modernization. We buy equipment. We ask farmers to cluster, and then we maybe make that equipment available. As recent as last planting season, I think there were tractors that were distributed here in Sierra Leone. But unless you shift mindsets, the utilization of that equipment will not lead to sustainability. We can't throw money at a problem. We can't throw equipment at a problem. We can't throw irrigation equipment. In Zambia, we've done that. I think we've had an irrigation program, a multi-million-dollar irrigation program that has been running for quite a while. I think their office is still in I think in woodlands. Okay. But at the end of the day, when you go on the ground, what is there to show? So experience should teach us that there is an additional problem that is not being addressed. And this is where my argument has been. We must shift mindsets, engage in a manner that begins to influence the way practitioners in agriculture think about agriculture and practice agriculture. If smallholders remain in their subsistence type thinking, they won't see the opportunity lost by not looking after the equipment that they'll have access to. Okay, it starts from there. We have larger players that have gone in agriculture, made a killing, and moved out of agriculture. Okay, so they are going in for the short term because they know they can reap huge profits. This is food or it's another commodity, and they move away. And the land is left damaged because of the agricultural practice. Okay, the people that had rallied around that, you know, in Zambia, I'll speak about Zambia. You know about the cotton issues in Zambia, where major value chains were developed around cotton. What has happened over time? Look at the instability of the soybean sector in Zambia right now, as we speak. Okay, you have major players that have gone in, that are able to make supernormal profits, but are not thinking long term. So they are very happy to switch the price. You know, if this year they buy at a very good price. So the other smallholders decide to invest in this particular commodity because in the previous season, it was getting a very good price. So the smallholders mobilize themselves, put their money in increasing production. The following year, the price drops drastically. Okay, and because it's soybeans which they have to sell, they can't keep. You know, it's a cash crop. They still end up selling at significant losses, but it's supernormal profits for the off-taker. And once they have done that and they have created a very bad reputation as far as soybeans is concerned, they move to another country or another area or another commodity. And they do the same thing. We have watched this repeat itself. Okay? And they keep skimming profits in different areas because they attract farmers and then they make a killing and they move out. They don't mind moving out. So I'm just giving you examples of the fact that mindset problems are not necessarily just at the smallholder. There are a lot of mindset problems there. These are people who've carried on a certain way of agriculture for centuries. Okay, so now to help them shift to more modern practices is not just about telling them and giving them equipment. It's a facilitated process that requires experts that know how to help societies evolve. Okay, it's a science on its own, outside agriculture. And then we have bigger players who can also have very short-term mindsets, like I've explained, the large players. Again, we need to engage them in a very clear way. Again, it calls on certain other skills and competences as we bring them in. As they come in and say they are bringing foreign direct investment, how are we managing them so that they don't leave us worse off than before they came in, which has happened in a number of countries. So this process of facilitating shifting mindsets is at the heart of the rebranding process. And my main argument is we need to call on experts that understand how to influence evolution in society to lead this process and fit everybody else in.
Yeah, before I go into the next question,
Can I just add something as
okay,
well?
okay.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much, Henry. Yeah, this is a very good insight, and I like this idea of make agriculture profitable but very low risk. The thing that you've talked about is on sustainability, and especially the post-harvest losses. And I think this is a major problem that happens, and I can attribute that. For example, we had the onion issue in Zambia, where because of we got plenty onion, but because of lack of logistical arrangements, i.e., storage, moving stuff around, and just packaging, I think could have been a problem, then we end up losing a lot. Tomato is, especially fresh produce, is a problem in terms of losses. Which brings me to the similar question which Jordan Malungas asked on the value addition. Are we not doing enough on that area to be competitive? Because I believe, again, post-harvest losses could be minimized if we can up the game on value addition. Well, what do you say on that, Henry and Christian? Oh, you are muted, Henry.
I just want to pick from where Christian has provided a brilliant insight into the aspect of modernizing agriculture. Before I come to answering your question, I must say that, and I want to go back to what Patrick said in terms of irrigation. You see, there are irrigation systems that are practiced in Africa, but probably we now need to look for advanced irrigation techniques. And these techniques can also help to conserve water. It is important because irrigation, if it is not managed properly, it also have its own consequences. So one aspect of modernization that we should not forget is ensuring that we have the right type of irrigation within the limits of the available natural resources we have. One thing also, I guess Christian will agree with me, which is not very popular in Africa. Sometimes there is so much myth around it, which is the use of hybrid seeds. They may look at the cost implication, but there are also good sides of it, because the whole essence of modernization is to increase production and productivity. So anything that we do to maximize those two aspects, we should pursue that, but not at the expense of nature. Application of fertilizer. Now, thank God we have two types. We have inorganic and organic. It depends on which angle you're coming from. There is also a new area which is referred to as precision farming, where you use sensors, you use GPS, you use drones. All of these will help you to be able to follow up the planting calendar accurately without having to waste the inputs. There is also, then now coming back to the question that you asked, which is post-harvest losses as it's linked to value addition. It depends on which angle you are looking at this. I remember working with Christian, we had a situation wherein one of the key aspects of this project that we were managing is to minimize post-harvest losses. And there were two levels. You have those that you call the SMEs and producer organization, and those that you call the agribusinesses. The producer organizations who were producing, and they were fighting that, oh, we are producing, but we don't have equipment to process. Give us equipment. The government went ahead and designed a project such that they incorporate the aspects of those equipment that can help them to add value. But guess what? Where maybe there is no synergy, you have not provided this particular grantee with equipment and also infrastructure that he can use to add value. But he has not been able to produce that raw material that can meet the installed capacity of those equipment. So when you look at the return on investment, you will find out that you are giving a small mill to a rice producer who can use that mill to produce or to add value to 60,000 kg or 60,000 bushels of paddy rice annually. But that same farmer can only produce not more than 2,000. So what are you talking about? You still have this issue of solving the post-harvest, and the smallholder farmers are not ready to provide the required raw materials. On the areas of the bigger agribusinesses, whom you will expect to introduce certain what you call systems like the outgrower system, where you go into contract farming with these outgrower farmers. They are also worried about the aspect of not having a mutual beneficial business relationship with the farmers. In the end, those farmers that they are supporting to feed into their mills in order for them to produce large scale that can even discourage or that can increase import substitution, they are not able to meet the requirement of their machinery. So in the end, you find out that by targeting the smallholder farmer to provide them with equipment in one instance, and also by supporting these large corporations, businesses, through an outgrower model, wherein you help them with input to produce more. In the end, those farmers will do side selling and will not be able to provide the much needed materials. So I would want to conclude by saying that, and I'm happy Christian has mentioned this, it has to be an inclusive business model. Without an inclusive business approach, there will still be existing gaps. And until we're able to realize that, until we're able to fill in those gaps, we will not be able to rebrand agriculture, and will not be able to modernize agriculture, and will not be able to make agriculture competitive. Let me stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamara.
Sorry, can I just add something there?
Yes, Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, on the issue of agri-processing, that is a challenging component in the value chain, because like Henry has rightly mentioned, it depends on production to satisfy the installed capacity, okay, of different facilities, processing facilities. So unless there is a sound and stable production system, it becomes very difficult to invest in the kind of machinery and other forms of technology that can deal with agri-processing. I do know, again, I'll refer back to Zambia because I've spent much of my time there. I do know that we have promoted establishment of industries, and there's been a lot of publicity when major factories are opened that maybe are doing tomato processing, soya processing into oil and things like that. And when we have evaluated the performance of some of those processing facilities, we discovered that, like Henry has rightly mentioned, they're at 30-40% of capacity. Now, those are businesses that are supposed to be sustained to cover their costs and make a profit and provide a return to the providers of the capital that was invested. Okay, so you see, the problem starts at production. If we do not align the system well right from production, it becomes too unstable, too unpredictable to establish a processing subsector in between the customer on one end and production on the other. So this is critical. So, and again, I'll go back to my point. Unless we transform mindsets where we have producers who know, for instance, that it may take 3-4 seasons to get to a stable point in terms of production. Okay, so if I produced sunflower this year and I sold to a processor, I may not have made as huge profits as I would have liked, especially if I'm producing for the first time. There's the learning curve. So I may not have done everything right. So even my production may not have been very good. So am I going to abandon sunflower and go to something else? Or should I stick to it and deepen my knowledge? Because even the mistakes I've made are part of learning, okay? The cost of those mistakes are cost of education, as we sometimes put it. Education costs money. So when you make a mistake, are you seeing that as the cost of learning, or are you seeing it as an indication that you should abandon growing sunflower? So those are mindsets. Because if the following year farmers will move away, what happens to the facility that has been installed to pick up on the raw sunflower and process into oil and other products? So unless we stabilize the production systems, it is very difficult to have a vibrant agro-processing. You find that some of the major industries that are successful in agro-processing are actually producing themselves to quite an extent. Look at Zambia. Okay, I'll use that example because it's a very large, now it's Pan-African business. It's now in West Africa as well, in Nigeria at least, and maybe even Ghana. They are processors, but to ensure they have steady flow of produce for them to process, they have integrated, into production. That way they have at least a certain critical volume of input that can sustain their processing as they also mop up and buy from others. Okay, so these are some of the coping mechanisms some industry, some players have used. But then look at the amount of capital investment required, because you cannot have an integrated business from the word go. Initially, you need to rely on other producers before you can venture into also integrating into production yourself. So unless we have reliable production systems, agri-processing is so risky that private sector players will struggle to invest capital because they fear they may not recover that money.
That's fantastic, Christian, and that was fantastic, Mr. Kamara. We've got Mr. Simukonda. He has said rebranding agriculture in Zambia. There is a lot to look at. Do you have a question, or do you wanted to contribute on that, Mr. Simukonda? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone there.
Just tell us where you are situated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in Zambia, particularly in Eastern Province, Petauke.
Fantastic. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Simukonda. Are you a farmer?
Yes, okay.
Are you a farmer?
Yeah, actually, yes, I'm a farmer. Yes, okay. I'm a farmer. Okay. Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Simukonda.
Thank you very much. I think my contribution on the rebranding of agriculture in Zambia, I think there's a lot of things that you have to look at. First of all, we have to know what we want to produce as a farmer, and also we want to know what is the value of what we want to produce. So I think what is hindering, especially the farmers, it's the production cost. I think that is really what is costing, and also what is hindering a lot of farmers. We look at the fertilizer. A lot of people, especially in Zambia, use fertilizer. Whatever want to produce, you want to use fertilizer. So now I think the government also, they introduced the issues of FISIPO. So now they are giving FISIPO, I think, to a lot of people. But you look at those people that they are giving that same FISIPO, they are just, in short, maybe we say, they are peasant farmers. They're just producing something to eat, not to sell so that they can make money. That's why you find that every year comes in, they are just producing what they want to eat. So, but if they bring such a way that, maybe, for example, like someone who can go and get, maybe, for example, like a loan, they'll give you the inputs and everything so that you produce at the large scale. And then now, after producing now, for example, if you produce maize, you can sell maybe for other countries, which means you're bringing foreign currency into the country. So we're looking at the farming kind of farming just on the small scale farmers. That is what we are looking at, especially a lot of people. That is a challenge. I think for now, let me end here.
Any contribution from Mr. Kamara or Dr. Christian Chileshe on what Mr. Smukonda said?
Maybe I just say something there. I think he's raising some very practical issues on the ground, the on the ground realities. In an earlier program, I had mentioned that we struggle with what we call information asymmetry, lack of adequate information. Okay, that is a major problem. When a farmer is preparing to start producing, do they know what it will take, what the cost will be? Is there information? Do they know where they will sell their produce? Like even Dr. Kamara has rightly mentioned, sometimes they don't know even where they're going to take their produce, so they are stuck with it, and you have post-harvest losses. Is the landscape clear and predictable? I think there's work to be done there, and this is where, especially for a country like Zambia, where I know they have an extensive agriculture extension system. For Sierra Leone, it's still working its way through, where it's possible for extension workers to communicate to farmers and help them understand from the word go what it will take, because you see, there are perceptions. If you say a loan is expensive, most people say, no, I can't get a loan. I've been in the rural areas. Eastern Province is one of the most productive places where Mr. Smukonda is. And you go there and you say, why don't you get a loan so that you can buy something? Because you have assets. You have been producing well enough, you have assets, and based on these assets, you can actually qualify for a loan. Someone will tell you, no, I can't go for a loan. It's expensive. Interest is too high. And you know what I sometimes do? I ask the same person the question, okay, so how much is interest? What are the banks charging? You discover the person doesn't even know the number. It's a perception that interest rates are high. And so because of that, there's a phobia against loans. Even if the number is quite high relative to other parts of the world. For instance, in Zambia, you can get interest rates of 30-something%, interest per annum. If it's 36% per annum without compounding, we can divide it by 12 and know that it is like 3% per month, isn't it? If it's 3%, if it's 36%, if we remove compounding, it means it is 3% per month. Okay, you may not borrow that money for the whole year. You are going to get that money and pay it back once you have sold. So it may be 6 to 7, 8 months down the line. So again, it reduces. Then you look at the profitability of your produce. It is not unusual if you do what you are supposed to do on the farm. Just practice paying attention to your crop, good crop management. You can actually make upwards of 70% profit when you sell. Okay? For the very countries where the interest rate is very high, even the profitability is very high as well. There are economics behind why the interest rate is even high in the first place. So when you work the numbers, you will find that actually you can go and borrow money at 36% interest and produce, sell, and pay back and remain with enough for you to reinvest. But some of those numbers are not there even for the small holder to look at. Okay, so if you are only seeing 36%, you panic, because that's very high. In other parts of the world, it is 3-5%. So 36 is seriously high. But also in other parts of the world, profits don't go beyond 15 to 20%. Come to Zambia, you can make profits of upwards of 60%. That is why you have investors still coming to Zambia. We still have money pouring into the country, even in agriculture, because there are huge profits to be made compared to other parts of the world. So once we have clear information, that helps them calculate if fertilizer is going to cost so much, how many do I need? What is my total cost? What is the return? Will I be able to cover my cost? Then you discover that there are many people that are going to venture into actual production. So there are a lot of perceptions. Lack of information introduces perceptions. Because if you don't know the facts, you begin to come up with your own thinking. Okay, there are people who feel that borrowing is bad. I've seen this even here in Sierra Leone where I am. You talk to people about borrowing and they feel it's very bad. It's wrong to owe someone money. Okay, so again, that becomes a challenge because you can't use your own money to grow your business. I shared an experience where I was based in South Africa at the time. I tried to use my own money to buy a major asset. And the person just standing next to me who didn't even know me, but who came from a more first world background, just rebuked me. He says, if you have that kind of money to buy for cash, why don't you invest your own money? You are supposed to use borrowed money to buy the asset. As you use the asset, you pay back the borrowed money. So you are paying back based on the utilization of the asset. So you have not used any of your own money. Okay. I walked away from that shop. I didn't buy that asset because I realized he was making sense. I came from a country where you buy for cash. There were no good bank loans that time. And then I went to a more developed economy where they don't use their own money. If you have money, invest. Then go and get money from the bank and buy a tractor. You don't use your own money don't lock your own money in a tractor. Put it somewhere else. Then get a bank loan, buy a tractor, use the tractor to pay back the loan. So you've not used your own money. So can you imagine, we are supposed to get to that point. But unless we change perceptions, people think interest rates are very high without looking at profitability. People think borrowing money is wrong, and yet businesses grow from money coming from elsewhere, not just ourselves. So all those are perceptions that need to be confronted, and people evolve in their thinking to realize that it's possible to access finance and utilize it and pay back. Again, if it's government giving the money, we don't want to pay back because we say it's our money. If it's government money, it's ours. That is perception. That is attitude that needs to change. Okay? And I can go on at ground level. Lack of information, lack of a facilitated process of change in mindsets is leading people to think the way they feel, and that is keeping us at the point where we are. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just add something?
No problem.
And I'm happy that Christian has taken this conversation to another level, because for me, what Christian is saying and tying it to the previous speaker who was saying that he's a farmer, but he's facing some bit of challenge in knowing what to do, how to run his business. It comes back to the point I earlier raised. And when you talk about modernization, like I said, it's not about you producing, it's about ensuring that you do the right investment and you have the return on investment. Some people are really not producing or using agriculture as a business. It's a way of life. And that mindset has to change. For us in Sierra Leone and in many other African countries, yes, government will provide extension services. But those extension services, to a larger extent, while they have the good intention, they are under-resourced. And because they are under-resourced, they will not be able to reach out to the number of farmers that they're supposed to support. So where does this lead us to? For me, if you are really in business and you want to do business, and I'm sure you will agree with me, most farmers are even reluctant to pay for services. They are reluctant to pay for services that can change their business, services that can change their mindset. For us, in the project I am currently managing as a grant manager, we have introduced what we call business development services. And I'm sure Christian is very familiar with the concept because we started pushing for it while we were at KPMG. And in the business development services, what it's trying to do is to teach you how to do business in agriculture. And all the aspects of planning, implementing, executing, it is a business. You will be able to determine, if I put this money to buy input, this is how much it's going to. But if you don't have those skills, That is why the business development service is there. In fact, in some countries, they have service providers who will go in on a consultancy basis to support you. But this only happens in donor-funded or government-funded projects. And this is where we still have a gap. And I say it here, grants are just a means to make a case, but they cannot change the landscape when it comes to agriculture. They are there to de-risk, but moving forward, the grants should serve as a means to de-risk and then be able to support the farmer or the agribusiness in its journey to become investment ready. Once you become investment ready, the private capital will now leverage on your business, knowing very well that there is very low risk in investing in your business. And this is where most of our farmers and agribusinesses are still struggling to reach, because it requires a lot and lot of clearly thought interventions. And until we're able to do that, whatever we do in agriculture, if we don't blend it, or if we don't make business development services as a national agenda, just like in other sectors of the economy, the high-tech industry, and you name it, if you cannot bring business development services, mainstream it within the agriculture sector, we just focus on production without looking at the business side of it, it's still going to be a challenge. I just want to buttress that aspect of which Christian has raised this discussion. And I'm happy that we have reached this level. And for me, the investment readiness, where you don't need to use your money, you can either ensure that you present your experience, the way you manage your business, your record keeping, and make your business attractive to potential investors, be it impact investors. And that is why I mentioned for the sustainability aspect, where you take cognizance of the environment that you work around it, because there are some investors, like the impact investors, they look at some of those aspects. So I'm sure if this gentleman who has clearly put it that he is struggling in running his business because he has certain gaps, if his government is able to put modalities in place and mainstream business development services, it will do a lot more to the sector.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Can I just add that? That's
Okay.
very interesting, actually. I'm just, what I'm getting now is an all-round support. I know, if we look at Zambian context, I think that lack of business support services or professional support services, we're just concentrating on the technical aspect of support, is what has even created problems in other sectors. For example, the default rate in CEEC loans, the youth empowerment in Zambia. So could it be, like, Christian, looking at Zambia's context, as they reform the FISIP, this component should actually be, one of those pillars that will support that, including the technical aspects such as extension services, because this is key if you want to make agriculture as a business.
Yeah, no, certainly. And as Dr. Kamara was speaking, and you're speaking as well, Mr. Bimbe, a lot of things flagged to my mind, because I've been working in this space for many years, and we've been talking. I'm not an agriculture, an agronomist, let me put it that way. I'm coming from an agribusiness angle. So I'm actually representing that same segment. And as I've engaged with the government over the years, one thing that is very clear is that aspect has been neglected, to the extent, I'll tell you, where we have a directorate of agribusiness in the Ministry of Agriculture, okay? A directorate of agribusiness, major component. for the most part, they are involved in distribution of FISIP. Now, can you imagine, in principle, you have done the right thing to establish a whole directorate. In practice, these people are busy making sure FISIP is being accessed. Now, like I said earlier, Dr. Kamara, FISIP is it's a subsidized inputs program. Okay, so subsidized seed, subsidized fertilizer program. So where the subsidized inputs, the cost of that is supposed to be recovered at harvest time, you know, and then the produce is collected and taken to a food reserve agency. Okay. Now, our input subsidy program is supposed to boost farmers so that they, after 3 years, they graduate. You know, you lower the cost of inputs so that you make it easy for them to learn, to build their own capital, and to build a track record so they can access external capital. And after 3 years, they graduate. For political reasons, the farmers do not graduate. So there are individuals that have been on that program forever. Okay. And then the selection of the farmers also is indiscriminate. In the end, even individuals like me have been approached to be on that program and have constantly declined. I do not qualify because my profile does not fit the person who needs an input subsidy. Okay. So now what has happened is that social welfare program, because that's what it has become. It's really a social welfare program to help food security, make sure they can produce something, they can sell, and they can have some money and some produce. The Directorate of Agribusiness is busy with that social welfare program. That kills it. Because we don't have actors going to the farmers and explaining the business of agriculture and giving them information that they do not have, helping shift perceptions by providing facts. So, number one, we do not have players within government who are focusing on that. Number two, we're not developing a cadre of private sector players that can do that, because this is consultants. So even at the district level, we should have individuals, even if they are retired, you know, agriculture persons, are retired this and that, and in Zambia, traditionally people have been retiring in the past at 55. They are still very young. So if we identify that pool of expertise, retired bank and so on, and then we work with them at district level and equip them with the ability to get to the farmers, speak to the farmers, communicate with the farmers, handhold some of the farmers that are emergent, that are growing, support them so that they don't crash in the process and end up despising farming. Okay, so we are not doing that. At the government level, we are not doing that. We're not encouraging private sector players that can support that kind of a process. So in the end, we're failing to break out of a situation where we have these smallholder farmers who are not growing and they keep shifting between one crop and another. And it becomes a kind of a situation where many politicians don't know what to do. And meanwhile, their term of office is running. Because if you're going to make any structural changes to an economy, you do it early in the term of a politician, because there are teething problems, there is pain that will come. But then you want the benefits to start showing before the end of that term. The moment you neglect doing the structural change early, it becomes difficult for you to do it in your second half, because the pain will be felt during the time of the next election, and you will lose the election even if you are doing the right thing. So timing becomes critical, and we are losing that time, for instance, in the current government.
That's fantastic, Christian. Let's go to the next question. Yeah, we've been talking about the need for rebranding. Yeah, we've been talking about the need for rebranding, and that's your main message today. But my question is, what other factors outside rebranding needs to accompany this process? Over to you, Dr. Christian.
Thank you, but just a quick one before I come to that. I've touched on the issue of timeframes. Whatever we do in rebranding, because it
Yeah.
involves structural change, which will
Yes.
cause certain players to exit.
Yes.
That's what it means. We have too many people in agriculture who shouldn't be there, but for lack of alternative, they are there. Okay, so it creates a lot of confusion. So because of the transformation that needs to happen, okay, it can't happen in one season. It can't happen even in two. My argument has been in the past that you need at least 3 years, okay, because it's a change management process. It needs the first year. It's a conventional change management. People that have studied change management will agree with me that it's a 3-step process. First, you disrupt, okay, the status quo. That's in the first year. There's a lot of learning and a bit of confusion as there's shifting around because you have said you're only going to provide support to this particular group. These others, please, you need to think about other things, or these are the alternatives, and so on. So the first year has a lot of confusion, okay? The second year is where now people begin to settle, or institutions begin to settle in the right places. There's a benefit of learning from a previous year, mistakes of a previous year, then it's settling happens at the second point. The third point begins to show positive results, okay? So it is from the third year, at the least, minimum, that you can begin to see the results. So it's a 3-year cycle. Again, that's what I'm recommending, and that's why it needs to start early in a political term of office, because the results begin to show from the third year onwards if things are done well. So coming now to the issue of what else needs to be involved. When you are rebranding, you are actually trying to influence mindsets and behavior. There will be resistance. There will be a lot of questions. Unless you have something to show for it, you cannot successfully rebrand. Because if people are comfortable where they are and you're telling them move to another place, they're going to say, what makes you think everything is okay? Can I see the evidence that I'll be better off if I shift? So the whole process of rebranding has to be accompanied by clear demonstration, meaning that accompanying the rebranding is a process where we are actually doing what we're encouraging people to do. There are examples of those that have gone the direction that we're encouraging. We must celebrate those, the front learners or the early adapters. We must profile them and show them to others so that the movement becomes attractive. Change must become attractive, okay? So it is a multi-pronged process where the early adapters are being celebrated and are being profiled, and others are being attracted towards moving in that direction. There is need for multiple approaches towards rebranding, because in this day and age, we have the benefit of technology. So there are messagings that must be developed in a very good way, maybe in different languages, that must be sent out, to provoke thinking. There are conversations that must be had at community level and facilitated. There are radio programs, there are TV programs, there are billboards that must be put in strategic places. Basically, you are reinforcing a message. You're actually trying to make people think about something and begin to consider adopting it. And it only happens, we know this from other spheres of development, that it is only when you reinforce a message in different ways, when you identify champions, opinion leaders, you help them understand what you're doing so that they become voices for you on the ground, okay? So it is a whole network of processes that must come and converge and drive one common message using different mechanisms. So at the end of the day, the actor, the player, is left with no choice but to say, look, this thing is very clear. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why have I continued struggling here when I am better off moving to another place? And so change becomes attractive and becomes necessary, becomes the only logical thing to do. So those are the other processes that are needed to create the change that we want. Not just in Zambia. I am sitting here in Sierra Leone and my message is exactly the same. There are mindsets that must be transformed, otherwise nothing will happen.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Dr. Bimbe, Mr. Bimbe, have you got anything to add or comment before Mr. Kamara comes in?
Thank you very much. At the moment, I will reserve my question after Henry has spoken.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Henry.
Yes. Thank you very much. The evening is becoming much more interesting. For me, beyond the issues raised earlier on, I want us to look at additional areas that probably we should consider beyond rebranding. One is the culture of partnerships. You know, when farmers engage in partnerships among themselves, will also help to boost the agricultural sector, because we've seen that practice where you encourage farmers to come in as a group. Some of them are cooperatives, some of them are producer organizations, some of them are specific to a particular sector. Collectively, it helps to boost their competitiveness. One other area also that we need to consider is brand identity. Brand identity, apart from rebranding in a general perspective, we should also encourage farmers or agribusinesses to be able to brand their products. And that is very common when you talk about marketing strategies. You encourage farmers to do packaging. The issue of packaging and labeling is not so common, particularly in most developing countries. But sometimes a product that is very good and that has not been branded, for it to be attractive, might also not be able to sell itself. Another area is the market demand. Of course, this has to do with quite a lot of study and research, because when the farmer or the agribusiness knows what the market is looking for, i.e., standard requirements. I remember a few weeks ago, we had a very important personality that came to Sierra Leone, who is the British Foreign Secretary, and it was on live TV that Britain is signing a memorandum of understanding with Sierra Leone to encourage trade between the two countries. This has been in existence ever since, and I'm sure Britain will be more interested in the area of agriculture, maybe tourism and mining. But when you look at these sectors, particularly agriculture, I can give you an example. Oil palm. Britain is one of the four leading countries that Sierra Leone is exporting crude oil and refined palm oil. But it begs the question of understanding what the market demands and the ability for a country to meet the entry requirement. You have tariff and non-tariff barriers. The non-tariff barriers that has to do with standard requirement quality is so difficult for developing countries to be able to demonstrate that they are meeting those requirements, i.e., either because their quality infrastructure is weak that will have supported them to test their product before being exported and not to be rejected. We are still struggling with those areas. So a lot of study needs to be undertaken to understand what the market requires and how can we build our infrastructure in order to meet. Even in the US market, you have the AGOA, which is also another promising area that Africa could have benefited. But it boils down to the same issue of entry requirements. Education, which is also key. With whatever we do, with whatever branding we do, if farmers are not properly educated, understanding how they can participate in the value chain. And for me, sometimes when you talk about value addition, it's not just about value addition. A farmer should know if he adds value, how much value can he capture? If a farmer does not know how much value he can capture, which means how much profit he's making, he will be reluctant to add more value. And when you look at the value chain or value addition, the farmers can add more value, can gain more money by just putting an effort in adding value. And adding value is not just the processing aspect. There are other elements, even at farm gate, beyond the farm gate. If farmers are properly educated, they know that they should be able to store their raw materials well. They should be able to transport their raw materials so that when they are being sent to the processing factory, they will still maintain the quality they deserve. Oil palm, we have what we call the free fatty acids level. Most countries, because of the way oil palm is being produced, the free fatty acid level is 3 times the acceptable limit. Why? Because farmers are not aware that they should process their palm oil bunches within 24 hours. So lack of training will make them to lose a lot of money. The last but not the least is the government policies, which I've mentioned earlier on. In all of this, we can do, if the policies are not right and the policies are not being supported so that state and non-state actors can roll them out in order to provide the enabling environment for the private sector to thrive, whatever initiative that we may want to put in terms of branding. And I don't know for Zambia, but in most African countries, for instance, they have various strategies that they develop, the export strategy, all sort of strategies. Sometimes when you look at the implementation of those strategies, you find out that the implementation is being challenged because the government has not been able to attract the much needed resources to implement some of those. So we will go on and go on and go on and go on. But for me, these are some of the things that I want to add on to what Christian have just mentioned in his presentation.
Yeah, that was
just a quick one. I just want to respond to Mubiana Likwasi, Joanne Mubiana. When I mentioned issues of finance from financial institutions and others, there's a question here, Dr. Chileshe, are these loans secured or unsecured? I can tell Joanne and many other people listening that there is never really a shortage of money. And I know this sounds very hard and feels like I don't understand. There's no shortage of money because the people that are supposed to be lending money are looking for somewhere to lend money so that they make a profit by the interest they charge. Too often it is us, the customers, who fail to connect with them. If you have never opened a bank account, even if you are just saving small amounts of money, how are you going to get a loan from that bank account? And I know there are banks that have existed for the last 20 plus years that have been willing to lend money, unsecured loans. The only thing they'll ask is you must have been saving with this bank for at least 6 months or more. Others can have different conditions. And they have seen your revenue, the deposits, you know, how you put you must be doing something that makes sense already in your own small way. So that when you go to the bank, you're not going to the bank to start from scratch. You start from scratch with your own money in your own small way, according to your pocket. Even if all you have is the equivalent to $100 or even $50, what can you do with that? So that you create this cycle where you say, I can get $50 and I can grow it to $150 in 3 months. You know, it's not much, but that is the pattern. I'm showing that I know how to work with an amount of money to take it to another level. And if I'm depositing $3, $5 a week into a bank account, okay? So there's a record that actually I have a stream of revenues, very small, but they are there. And based on that, if I went to the bank and I told them I would like to borrow money, they'll use that history to say, how much can we lend you? Because you have seen how much you deposit. And they'll say, since we're going to lend you money, obviously you'll be able to deposit more because we're boosting you up. So they'll calculate something and say, okay, for starters, we can lend you so much so that we see if you are capable of paying back, okay? And they follow you up. I know that we've had unsecured loans, we've had secured loans, we have loans that are secured on very basic things like TV or a bicycle, whatever it is, just for them to have a basis to say at least there's something they can know about that they can come and retrieve. We have had loans that are secured because you are in a group and you have signed for each other. Okay, so you have just vouched for each other and say, okay, if any of our members fail to pay, then the rest of us will pay on behalf of that. So we are 10 of us, will get loans, and if any member fails to pay, the others become responsible to pay for that. So it's a kind of a group guarantee arrangement. Okay, so there are different ways. There are even grants that are being given to people that are busy in agribusiness and trying to move forward. But I can tell you that a lot of the loans have not been paid back. A lot of the grants have not been utilized properly. And so the environment is worried, it's scared. Okay, so you cannot blame a donor, you cannot blame a financial institution. It is the practice that they have observed. It is what they have gone through that make them uncomfortable. Otherwise, there are loans and grants out there. Some loans are secured, some loans are not secured. The financial institution will tell you the conditions on which they are willing to lend, but they are willing to lend. That I can tell you, because I've operated in the sector. I've trained the financial institutions on how they can lend to agriculture. So I even have names of institutions that I have actually trained myself on how they can lend to agriculture. Okay, so it is up to us to change in the way we engage with the financial sector, the way we run our businesses, and we go and present that to them. We are going to start from somewhere. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Christian. Mr. Bimbe, your next question to
Yes, mine will be, let's get it before we come to the other question. It's a comment. I mean, I've been following about this value chain and the whole process. Of course, you've got the production, you've got the agri-processor in between. Probably you've got a seller, maybe a supermarket, and then finally the consumer. Then obviously pricing has to be set somewhere. I can understand, you know, in most places they'll have it, like in Zambia, have a floor price for maize. I'll give you an example from in the UK. At the moment, there are those people, there's a school of thought that says agriculture, that value chain is broken simply because of the free market economy, where the supermarkets are the biggest off-taker of these agriculture products. As a result, they are driving their costs because they want to save the customer. They are competing on price among themselves. They are driving these producers and agribusiness down because they are the ones setting the price. So in that scenario, this is a scenario that is playing out, for example, in developed countries, the UK, for example. How do we then create a value chain process that does not create that problem within our respective countries in Zambia, Sierra Leone, as we grow our agriculture? Do we have a concept of a minimum price, for example, or do we let the market drive that pricing? Over to you, Henry and Chris.
It's a very interesting question, but the dynamics in the UK slightly different. I know the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, the Asda's, those companies, in fact, if you go into their stores these days, you will see a lot of products. Some of them are being sourced from Africa. Some of them are sourced from the Caribbean. But what I know, I studied in England, and I did my second master's on making a research on Tesco's. And I was able to discover how they structured their value chain or their supply chain, sort of. Their supply chain is so complex that even if you are part of their supply chain, you also have to meet their own standards. And they will not leave you all by yourself. They will set the standards and also ensure that they work with you to meet those standards, because they need you. And this is where we are getting it wrong most times. Even smallholder farmer in several value chain. And what you call a value chain is it has to, when you engage a farmer in a contract farming, or call it an outgrower, to be a mutual beneficial business relationship. If that relationship is not mutual, it's not beneficial, you find out that the farmer should be able to understand what profit is making and what profit every actor along the value chain is making. Then he or she becomes so conscious that he should participate effectively, because if something happens along the chain, he's going to lose. And if you look at the chain, the analysis of the chain, the supermarkets are making very, very small profit. They don't capture much of the chain, the profit, because they are not adding too much value. What they are adding is just branding by packaging it, labeling it. But the work is done way down from the production, bringing it to the middlemen, if there are middlemen, of the value chain with the value, the farmer has to be very, very in
I think we're having some. Okay.
It varies from commodity to commodity. If you are implementing a value chain, a contract farming for food products, then you have 100% assurance that there will be no side selling. For instance, tobacco, for example. But once the product has to do with food and the people are hungry, they will still use that food to feed themselves. You have a challenge of either the farmer himself may not want to sell everything, and in the small aspect he will want to sell, to make much more profit out of it at the expense of the market. So you find out that to a larger extent, that process may not work in Africa if it's for African market. But if it's for European market, where the market is standardized, I know, like in how you call it, in Ghana, they used to airlift pineapple in the morning, take it to the UK in some of those supermarkets. They concentrate. So that just tells you how the supply system works. And all the farmers that they are working with, they are very happy, because the products that they are producing is not meant for them to use it as their source of food. Even if it's a food product, they may rather prefer to sell all and use part of the money to feed themselves. So it depends, sir. It depends on the kind of approach that we want to take. But beyond this, for me, we still have to ask ourselves this question. Promoting agriculture using the nucleus farming approach versus the outgrower approach, because we've seen investors coming in Africa. Those investors that are supposed to work with farmers, they are refusing to work with farmers. Instead, they go for concessions that are given to them by government that will come with a model that does not require them to work with the farmers. And they, to a larger extent, are the most successful industries and the most successful businesses here. Those who venture to work with the farmers, to a larger extent, they fall along the way. Maybe not for this session, but it's something that we also need to look into. That will help us to unlock some of these things that you are asking. But these are very critical issues. Once we are able to understand the business model that we can use by value chain, because each value chain, you may apply different business model. Once we are able to understand the kind of business model, and this may require quite a lot of research, then we'll be able to do a pilot study for some of these produce that we are doing in some parts of the continent.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Mr. Bimbe, have you got a question or? Oh,
No, I think we are probably going on to the last question, is it?
yeah.
Okay. This is the big one.
Yeah.
Hello.
So,
I pause for now.
yes, please. Okay.
Sorry, what did you say?
I was saying yes, please. You're asking whether to pause. You've said you've paused now. I said, okay, thank you.
No, you were asking a question. You're asking me a question.
Oh, the question. No, this is the one that you've answered. I haven't asked any question. That's the question that you've answered, and
Okay.
you've put it very well. That I think for us now, and Christian, probably we can now kind of develop another program based on the business side of the actual agriculture, because this value chain, supply chains, and how they fit together with the business models is very interesting, I think, to capital. So it's something that Henry, God willing, will have you again to just go through this thing. It's becoming very,
Sure.
very interesting.
Sure.
The last bit of our discussion is just kind of going backwards and saying, what went wrong? Why haven't we gone this way already? We got some of our country like Zambia got independence. 64. Of course, we had copper that time. Agriculture started rearing its head around the 80s, probably 90s at that time. But why haven't we thought through all this kind of approach that we've been discussing throughout this series?
Well, I'll speak about Zambia and maybe a few countries in the region in Central Africa. It has been about political will. Okay, we have not had the political will. I'm not saying there's no political desire. Okay, I think many politicians mean well and they are sincere when they talk about wanting to develop agriculture, and they have a certain level of resolve about addressing agricultural problems. We know in Malawi one president who actually insisted he will be the Minister of Agriculture, and he transformed agriculture for the period that he was president. But then the country fell back after that. Okay, so we know that there can be a genuineness amongst politicians. I know here in Sierra Leone, the president prioritized agriculture. It was a big issue in his campaign, and when he became president, it was a big issue. That I'm also aware even here. But I'll tell you what the challenge is, the depth of that commitment. Because when they come in and they look at what's the seemingly complex way of addressing, disentangling it, that usually kind of causes them to pick a path that they think they can handle, and usually that does not produce sustained outcomes. And here is something that they may not have thought about, which I have been advancing in these programs. Bring in outside experts beyond agriculture. Problems in agriculture will not be solved by experts in agriculture. Because of the nature of agriculture, you need to involve experts beyond agriculture, because it goes to the core of our very existence. Okay, so that's something I think they haven't tried. I think they have genuinely done what they think they can do, and it has not. It can be very frustrating, because the next election comes and you have not delivered what you promised, and you have not because you haven't tried. Okay, So I think we need to change the approach. We need to use an approach that goes to the core of our existence, and it's about changing the way we think about agriculture, the way we practice it. In Zambia, the most successful person was Kaunda. His ideology may have been wrong, socialist ideology, because it's not sustainable, but he achieved a lot. The practice was consistent with his beliefs, and he moved very far in that direction and achieved a lot in that direction. The catch was that the approach did not incentivize productivity, because if it's common ownership and it's not rewarding effort and everything, then at the end of the day, you are waiting for somebody else to work hard, because at the end of the day, you don't lose anything if you have not worked as hard. And if you work very hard, you're actually subsidizing somebody else. That was the kind of approach, okay? When you have a socialist kind of approach. And also when you have heavy government involvement, it starts becoming inefficient, because the institutions within the value chains are state-owned. So you have a lot of inefficiencies. So it was not for lack of trying, but we can learn something from people like Nyerere, Kaunda, and a few others, but using a different philosophy, a more capitalistic philosophy that rewards effort, but ensuring that we build a system that changes the way people think about agriculture and practice it. That is what we haven't done. We have not involved experts beyond agriculture.
That was fantastic, Christian. We're now getting closer to the end of the program. So what I'm gonna do is there's somebody in the background. His name is Christian. He's gone. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask each person here, Mr. Kamara, then Mr. Bimbe, and then we'll end up with Dr. Christian Chileshe. At least if we can do 3 minutes each, we should be able to finish before in the next 15 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Kamara. What are your closing remarks?
First of all, I discussion today as an opportunity for us to have a deeper rethink individually as a continent and collectively as a continent. And I like the question posed by Nasen, saying that what went wrong. And I think we all have the answers. For me, where there is a problem, there is always an opportunity for improvement. And this is why I am happy Christian keeps saying that you may fix the problem in Africa, not by using the same people that are managing the system. You might bring in outsiders who may have much more deeper lens to look into issues that are affecting that sector. And it's now time for us as Africans to think collectively and see how we can leverage on the potentials we have within the continent. It just demonstrates what happened today. I actually came into listening to Christian because I always love hearing from him. So I ended up participating in this program. And I am happy with humility to share my own experience. I think that as a continent, the issue of private sector growth, how we can use the private sector to boost agriculture is very key. Because before this time, much of donor interventions is done through our respective ministries. Now they are moving, shifting the goalpost. But to what extent can we make the private sector ready to participate in this space? It's a whole lot of engagement and rebranding. So I think we are in the right direction, and I would like to urge the organizers of this particular evening forum to continue reaching out to find answers to what will make this continent a competitive continent for food security. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamara. That was fantastic. Yeah, from a guest, from a listener to one of the co-guests. Well done. Thank you so much. We want to have you again. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh,
Thank you.
Mr. Bimbe, over to you. Your closing remarks.
Yeah, I'll just be quick because want to do the 2 hour thing in 10 minutes. I'd just like to thank Christian and Henry for really your insightful thinking. You guys, you've really understood agriculture from both ends. And this is what has always been missing. And I feel, as Henry has said, we are on the right path. And probably as we move ahead with these programs, we try to unpack a lot of these things. I would love to see in the future, probably we start looking at the practical aspect of all this, what we're doing. I know we are doing the practical aspect, but having more people like Smukonda was coming from the ground with the practical realities of what they are facing was quite inspiring as well. So thank you very much. I don't have much to say on this one. It's been a very, very, very educative. I've learned a lot from you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the viewers who've been watching us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bimbe. Dr. Chileshe, over to you. Closing remarks.
I'll be very careful not to take away the good closing remarks that have been made by just saying that change doesn't just happen, it is caused. And so it is what
Dr.
we do.
Chileshe, before you continue, we've got somebody in the background. His name is Alan Chileshe. Maybe he can say one or two things before you close. We give him an opportunity. Alan, any comment, any questions before Dr. Chileshe can make his closing remarks? Over to you.
Mic on. Okay. Thank you so much. It's been the past two programs have been quite educative, and I think that the emphasis on mindset change and that change does not just occur on the one, but on the many. I think that I really like that one. So thank you so much.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Alan, for that good, though short contribution. Dr. Chileshe, over to you, your closing remarks.
I would like to throw a challenge to Zambians. We need champions, and those champions must come from different spheres of our society, maybe not just Zambia. Let me challenge the whole of Africa. They don't have to be experts in agriculture, like I've emphasized. They just have to be patriotic Africans who feel there has to be change in the way we've been doing things, to step forward and to put their shoulders to seeing how we can transform agriculture, because that's one of our greatest assets. I'm hoping some politicians are listening and will be challenged to actually take this up and begin to at least ask the questions. They may not have the answers. Start asking the questions. There are experts that can step forward and support this process. So let's see what we can do to transform Africa in our own lifetimes. Thank you very much.
And our viewers, thank you so much, Dr. Chileshe. Thank you so much, Mr. Kamara, Mr. Bimbe, my co-host, and Alan Chileshe. And our viewers, thank you so much for your viewership, wherever you're watching us all over the world. We've now come to the end of the program. May the good Lord bless our mother Africa. I don't have to say Zambia now because Mr. Kamara is there. And good night and bye for now.